Now, lawmakers have wasted no time condemning this behavior, and rightfully so, and calling for investigations. And one of the first to speak out was Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri. In a statement issued Friday, Senator Blunt said, quote, "I join my colleagues in calling on the Obama administration to conduct a transparent review and ensure this type of behavior is not tolerated moving forward, and Americans' First Amendment rights are protected," end quote. And I'm happy to welcome Senator Blunt to the show now to discuss what I think is a very, very serious matter. Senator, welcome to Washington Watch.
Well, Tony, it's good to be with you again, and this is clearly outrageous, and there's a series of behaviors going on that the American people need to be concerned about, and clearly using the IRS is at the top of that list. I think, not to jump to any conclusions here, but George Will on Sunday on one of the Sunday shows was actually reading from an impeachment article for President Nixon, and I think it's in Article 1, using the IRS for political purposes. Today, the AP had a story that said that the administration has been systematically getting phone records for their reporters. And when you look at that list of reporters, they're largely, it looks like to me, reporters who report on intel and foreign policy and things like Benghazi. I think the AP called the administration's actions massive and unprecedented intrusion into what they do. Clearly, the IRS is a massive intrusion into these groups who are trying to do what the First Amendment clearly gives them the ability to do, which is talk about the direction of the country.
Well, the IRS has become a leash around the necks of its citizens, trying to keep them in check so they can only go so far. Now, you were one of the first lawmakers to demand answers on this revelation, into this revelation. And I want to ask you, what would you like to see done? What do you want to see happening going forward from here?
Well, I think we need to have an investigation on this. Hearings are the first place to start that and then see where that goes. I hope that we get to the bottom of what's happening here and send a strong message to anybody involved that this is not going to be tolerated, that you can't use the government to punish those who question the government. There are countries that do that, but the United States of America should never want to be on the list of countries where that's acceptable behavior.
That is chilling. That is chilling that your government could use the IRS or any other agency, for that matter, to squelch the voice of the citizens. I mean, that short circuits our democratic system of government, and I think can only lead to bad outcomes.
Right, and when you think back at during the campaign itself, we probably weren't as outraged as we should have been when the government was going after people that appeared to be powerful and had money that they could give to groups. I think Sheldon Adelson had a labor investigation, a Justice Department investigation, and an IRS investigation when he gave money to conservative groups. I remember a couple of other individuals who suddenly they were giving money to a group helping conservative candidates. You remember this? And they had all of a sudden they had all kinds of problems with the government that they hadn't had 90 days earlier. That was obvious and out there during the campaign. But going after these groups of citizens just trying to band together to question the things that happen in their country is a hot button that I think hopefully this administration will have wished they never touched, and the lesson will be to others. This is not what is tolerated in our country.
Absolutely. You're listening to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Thanks so much for being with us on this Monday afternoon. I'm joined by my good friend, Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri. We're talking about revelations on Friday through an apology by an IRS official that the IRS, now going back, the evidence suggests at least back to 2010, was targeting conservative organizations and individuals. And Senator, to your point, I think many people thought those were isolated incidents. They didn't think it was widespread. And contrary to what many would say on the right, we're not given to conspiracy theories. We want to think the best in our government, and we're not even thinking the worst of this administration in doing things like that. But now that this is coming forth, it does appear to be that this administration has been operating and creating an environment. When you put Benghazi in this and some of the other things, it's corruption. I mean, that's the only thing I can see here.
Well, and of course, if you question the administration, it can't be you can't be right. What did the president say today about Benghazi? This is a sideshow. The Secretary of State a few weeks ago said, "What difference does it make?" Come on. I mean, how can you take these incidents and want to trivialize them in that way? It makes a big difference. I'll bet these reporters whose phone records have been perused don't think that it is a sideshow. I suspect they'll think it's a really big thing, and of course it is. If you're afraid to put your head over the wall of the fort, nobody puts their head up. That doesn't happen in a democracy that works like a democracy is supposed to work. That happens in countries where everything is so complicated and complex that everybody knows they've done something wrong. They just don't know what it was. And now you send this message that if the title of your organization includes the word patriot or Tea Party or 9/12, you surely must be doing something wrong, and we're going to have to take a careful look at you. In fact, I'm told, Tony, that they actually contacted contributors to these groups with the message that, well, you know, your contribution may not be tax exempt. What is that if it's not trying to put an end to those who question what you're doing?
Yeah, as more information surfaces on this, and it seems like we're getting more by the hour, it is extremely troubling in what they were doing. But it's interesting, they were targeting groups that were, talking about the Constitution, limited government. And I thought about, when I read through one of the articles, I said, you know what? That actually used to be our public schools that used to teach kids about government, about the Constitution. Of course, that's long been lost, and so we have these nonprofits that have come in and filled the void that's left there, teaching Americans what it means to be an American under the Constitution of the United States.
That's a good point. They might have had to monitor my high school civics class, now that I think about it, because all of those words were used in one way or another, talking about the miracle of America and the United States, and how unlikely it was that we would come up with this government that would somehow be able to balance itself and and keep itself in check. And to do that, you can't let one part of it just decide they can do in their part of the government whatever they want to do and forget the rest of the constitutional protections.
What's threatening about that? What's threatening about teaching Americans about why America is exceptional?
Well, of course. It's the antithesis of threatening. It should be building who we are, talking about the miracle of the Constitution, talking about what it means to be patriotic, and it shouldn't be threatening at all. It should be seen as just the reverse of threatening in a democracy, to be talking about those things. And even if it is challenging, that's what our country is all about, the capacity of people to be able to stand up and challenge the government.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to go back to something you mentioned just a moment ago about George Will making the comparison on the Sunday show, one of the Sunday shows, about Richard Nixon and one of the articles of impeachment with using the IRS. Well, we use Watergate as really the benchmark of corruption. I mean, everything, in the last, 35 years, if it's some corruption, it's Travelgate, it's Iran-Contra-gate. Well, I mean, this is right out of the textbook of corruption, I think, that we saw in the Nixon administration, where there apparently, if it's not a specific list of enemies, it's certainly a criteria for those to be listed on this list of enemies. And I think it's incumbent upon Congress to drill down and get answers on this. And I have to ask you this question. I know you have spoken out. Mitch McConnell has spoken out, other members, Republican members, and I've seen a few Democratic members speak out on this. But I've not seen anything from Harry Reid. Will the Senate actually look into this?
Well, you know, it's hard to find an example where the Senate has looked closely at any of these other things. Now, the House has been purposeful in the oversight responsibilities of the Congress, but the Senate hasn't been. There may be enough things going on here all at once that even Harry Reid and the Democrat leaders in the Senate decide we can't just continue to give them a pass on everything. It can't be Benghazi is a sideshow, the IRS is a sideshow, the AP reporters are a sideshow. Everything can't be a sideshow. Something has to be the pattern of the government in a way that it can't be accepted.
Well, I think it's more of a three-ring circus than sideshows, because we've
just using the president's word today, not my view. This is what he said about looking into Benghazi. Now, the people who were in Benghazi didn't think it was a sideshow. I was on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate at the time. And as soon as General Petraeus came with the CIA, which is either the Friday before or the Monday after that weekend where these talking points were out, I said, well, didn't we get everybody out of there that was still alive on September the 12th? Why don't you just ask them what happened? And now it is months later before any of them are ever in a position to talk about what happened. They knew that day what had happened. They knew before anybody in the administration began to publicly talk, and they were available to us. The answer I got, well, only the FBI is allowed to talk to them, and that was almost well over half a year ago.
All right, Senator, we're out of time, but quickly, what can people do to help make sure Congress doesn't drop this and they do look into it?
Well, I think people need to show their outrage. I've asked any group from Missouri, and sort of be glad to hear from any other group that actually had a problem getting their tax-exempt status, had what they thought was a unreasonable involvement with the IRS. And I've talked to a couple of Tea Party and Patriot groups in Missouri today to say, did you have any problems? The two I talked to said, we didn't, but we either had our status long before that, or we didn't try to get status. So
Senator, we got to run. Got up against the break.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. We'll keep we'll keep in contact
from people who've had a problem.
All right, we'll do. We'll be right back after this break. Don't go away.